It's my pleasure to be the host today of this event and to welcome everybody to this amazing venue this morning. Isn't it fabulous? And it's not only beautiful, but it has been transformed into sustainably focused office space, which I think is very fitting for our discussions today. It's amazing to see so many of you this morning in person, and I am completely overwhelmed by the number of people that are here, especially since it's a Friday morning. That's amazing. I didn't think anybody came into the city on Friday morning. So thank you for making an effort to come. I'm super impressed. I'm super impressed also just to see all the familiar faces, so many clients amongst you, so many friends, supporters of Black Sun, along with a lot of new faces. So for those of you that haven't been to a Black Sun event before, welcome today. We are so excited to have you. This is our first live event in over 3 years, and we're especially excited to have the FRC here today. I don't even know where they are. There, a few of them around, yeah. For this event with the FRC that we've done in partnership for the last 6 years. So this is our 6th year of doing it. It's a real opportunity for us to bring you closer to the FRC and the work that they're doing, but also to bring the FRC closer to you. So I would like to extend a special welcome and thanks to the team at the FRC for supporting us and for being here today. So the objective today and of this event has always been to give you everything you need to be aware of to tackle this year's reporting season, okay? What you need to be thinking about for now and also for the future. So hopefully when you go away from today, you'll have shared experiences, challenges, and opportunities with your peers, learned from each other, and also learned from the FRC in terms of what should be on your agenda. So this is what I'm really super excited about, because with this group of people, we're going to have some amazing conversations. So that's great. And before I start, I just really wanted to give a special shout out to Naomi and Amita, particularly from Black Sun, who've not had to organize the logistics of this event once, but twice. As you know, we've had to reschedule the event because it originally landed during the Queen's morning period. So if it wasn't for their hard work behind the scenes, we wouldn't have had so many here today. So thank you again. And also, I just wanted to extend my thanks to Schroeder's today for their generosity in hosting us in this amazing space. And I see a few of you here from Schroeder. So thank you again for hosting us. Okay, so hands up if this is your first live event with over 100 people since COVID. Okay, good. Fantastic. Hands up if this is your first engagement with Black Sun. Okay, a lot of newbies. Welcome. Fantastic. So hands up if this is your first engagement with the FRC. Not so many, okay. We've got some work to do, Black Sun. Okay, so what I wanted to do is, in addition to myself today, you're going to hear from the key team at Black Sun, 2 of our lead advisors from Black Sun, Ann Kirkby and Harriet Rumble, and also our amazing Chief Executive, David Christofferson. And just to let you know, the team at Black Sun, I couldn't fit all their pictures, but there's lots of people from Black Sun here that will be helping out, moderating, scribe, and just general helpers. So please feel free to go to them for anything that you need. Throughout the day, you'll have a great opportunity to engage with everybody. And I just wanted to let you know we are doing it Chatham House rules for the roundtables, okay? All the slides and everything will be distributed after the event, so you don't have to worry about scribbling down copious notes. So we'll send those out afterwards, and we'll also take recordings of the not recordings of the roundtable, but we'll capture the main learnings from the roundtables and also feed it back to you for your own use afterwards, okay? So as I said, we have a super team representing the FRC today. We have Kate O'Neill, who leads on all the stakeholder engagement and is back for the 3rd year in a row. Yeah, fantastic over here, so thank you. We've got Miranda, who leads on the strategy and transformation into ARGA, and I don't know where Miranda ended up in the back corner there. And Miranda not only was a very engaged client of Black Sun a few years ago, But the last time I saw you in person was actually here, about 4 years ago. So lovely to see Miranda. And last but certainly not least, we've got Sarah Jane. And I haven't seen Sarah Jane yet, so I'm hoping. Fantastic. Here with us for the first time, but I'm sure not the last time. And we're super excited to hear what she's got to say, because she's going to tell us everything about ESG and sustainability. And we know that's top of mind. Okay, so since not that many of you know Black Sun, I know David's going to say a few words at the end to tell you a little bit, but just to set the context for who we are. We are a strategic advisory, engagement, and communications agency. We help ambitious companies really understand their audiences, bring to life their value creation story, and build enduring relationships with all of their stakeholders. And we really believe that communications can really help to spark positive change and drive long-term sustainable performance. And the other thing you've probably heard me say loads of times before is we see the reporting process as an opportunity, not an obligation, okay? So I think we want to be focused on the opportunity today. A couple things that I think make us distinctive is that we're insight-led, so we really focus on understanding the market, conduct a lot of research. Hopefully in the packs you've got some of our latest research on the trends in the FTSE 100 reporting, as well as our corporate website and digital research. Any questions about that, please ask any of the team. We'd be happy to share more about that. The other thing that makes us distinctive is we like to share in the debate and share best practice and convene these sorts of things, because I think we have to work together on all of this. And also we're very practical day to day. We're privileged to work with many amazing organizations that are here today. So we're really hands-on with all of our clients, really trying to understand the complex reporting requirements and what that means for business more broadly. So ultimately, as you can see, I'm passionate about this, and we as a company are passionate about helping corporates navigate the complexities of the changing environment and really trying to help nudge companies to transition to sustainable businesses. Okay, so the challenges that we all face this year continue. I'm not going to go into that, but there's no doubt that companies must think more broadly about how they affect the world. That stakeholders expect companies to understand all the ways they affect people and the planet and do something about it. And I genuinely believe that the majority of companies are trying, and trying really hard. And that's one of the reasons that we put these things on. And I think businesses are an amazing force for good. And I hope that today inspires ideas and discussions around the way that we can help each other and help businesses continue to be a force for good. So the agenda for today, very quickly, and don't keep me to timings, I've got somebody that's going to help me with the timekeeping, is the first part of the session. We're going to hear from two of the FRC speakers, and then we're going to break into a roundtable discussion for about half an hour, okay, based on those groups. We're then going to have a quick coffee break. We're going to come back and hear from Sarah Jane, the last speaker from the FRC. And again, then we're going to have roundtable discussions on different topics. And then we're going to have a final close. And then we invite you to come and share a light lunch with us and hopefully a drink. I think at that point, I'll probably need one. And after all, it's a Friday, right?
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Hello and welcome, everyone. Obviously, a hugely popular event. I've been coming to these for 3 years, and this is my first in real life one. So thanks for having us, Black Sun. The FRC Black Sun event is a calendar event for us and gives us an opportunity to talk to so many of you. I would say that's a bit of a misnomer on what I'm going to talk about, because actually I will not steal the thunder from Sarah Jane and Miranda on actual details around the changes that are coming up and are currently underway. But I always like to give an update on the FRC, what we're up to, what we're working on. So I'll touch on some of it, but leave the details for them. I looked back at my notes that I prepared 3 years ago when I did the first keynote speaker thing for this event. And it was incredible to see what we were talking about at the FRC then and how much in 3 years we've moved on. And if John Thompson, our CEO, was here, he would say what is in the 3 years is he probably most proud of. And I think apart from the FRC, and he wouldn't say this because it's under his leadership, becoming from the Kingman fairly bruising review saying it wasn't fit for purpose, it was a ramshackle house, into what it is today, an organisation with influence, reach. It's gone from when I joined 2.5 years ago from 180 people to about 440, because there were doubts about our abilities as an organisation to take on all of the new parts of our remit that becoming ARGA would mean. He'd also be very proud of the way in which people better engage and understand our remit, which, let's face it, when you look at it cold, you think, well, where's the linkages there? You look after auditors, actuaries, accountants, and you also do reviews, and you do corporate reporting review, and you have the stewardship code, and you have the corporate governance code. And so how does that all fit together? And I do have a slide that talks about our ecosystem. But he would say none of us go out there and people say, oh yeah, you're the audit regulator. Stop. They get that the intersectionality of so much of what the FRC's work. And the people who are presenting here today would say as well, we're very proud that the hard work in helping educate people about what we are, how we're the centre of a lot of the corporate life of Britain, and we influence international standard setters and regulators. We're very proud of that. I mean, I'm sure Sarah Jane will talk about this when she does her piece, but on things like sustainability and ESG, we've really helped standard setters around the world get their heads around some of the real challenges in getting some consistency. So that's some opening remarks. But when I look back at those notes, I even was taken aback at how much we've moved on. I remember most of my speech talked about the waiting game for the Bayes white paper that we were waiting and waiting and waiting to be published, and it finally was published in March 2021. And then everybody became obsessed about the consultation around that. And we were thrilled that it was one of the most high number of respondents to that consultation, and many of you in this room may have contributed to that either directly or through trade associations, trade bodies, institutes, etc. And it was very pleasing, trawling through those 600, which I did, responses, that there was one unified issue, and that was, yes, the FRC should become ARGA. It should be put on a statutory footing with the right type of powers to encourage the right behaviours in all parts of our remit. And I think that was, to all of us on EXCO and the board, really pleasing to see that people really understood the importance of the FRC's activities in better outcomes for not just our stakeholders, but your stakeholders as well. So that's my kind of memory lane canter. I also wanted to remind everybody about how far we've come. The journey isn't over. Miranda will talk about the transformation program and the next steps in her piece. But, so what's happened this year? I thought it was timely to remind you all that we've had a big year. We finally got a new chair, and as the keeper of the Corporate Governance Code, we were struck by the irony that we did not have a chair for a year. Our outgoing chair was over the 10-year limit, and we didn't even have a full board. So all of those things were very important for us to fix. So Jan du Plessis joined us, and we were delighted that he did, given his extremely rich experience as not just chair of major corporations, but his sphere of influence in the corporate world, both in the UK and internationally. So we did finally have a full functioning board, and our Section 172 report this year was much shorter than it had been in previous years. We published our plan and strategy in 2022, which is really going to the 3-year look ahead, which is going to take us towards ARGA. Maybe I'm being a bit optimistic on the date of that, Miranda, given that we're still waiting for the legislation, but we're looking forward all the time, and we want to be, when that legislation is agreed, ready to go as a fully formed entity. We were waiting for the government's response this year. We seemed to spend a lot of time waiting at the FRC, and the response to the white paper, probably the biggest takeaway from that was the fact that a UK version of SOX would not be introduced. That was probably the most violently disagreed with suggestion in the response to the Bayes consultation paper. We think it's a missed opportunity because we felt that the US had given us some very good examples of how effective it had been. But, you know, you can't win them all, and we push on. So we looked at what was in the government's response. A lot of it said we will ask the FRC to do this through standards and code setting rather than waiting for the primary legislation. So in response, we published a position paper, and Miranda is definitely going to go into some detail about that. So Bayes push on with legislation that we need to become AGA and some of the other powers that we will need statutory basis for example, competition powers. But in the meantime, we are not going to be idle, and the position paper lays out a number of initiatives, some of which are underway currently. On the corporate governance sphere, much to the horror of David Stiles and Maureen Beresford, they will be opening the code next year for consultation, mainly around audit resilience statements, not the whole thing. I don't think they feel that the whole thing needs to be reviewed and consulted on, but in the elements that relate to the resilience statement assurance, that definitely will be happening. We published our annual report, and as I said, for once our section 172 was shorter and actually showed us as a compliant with our own code, but it also outlined a lot of the growth at the FRC, not just in human capital, but in the functions that we now can undertake. And the most recent, and this has been added to our wheelhouse, we're going to take on oversight of local audits. Important in the ecosystem, obviously, there has been a lot of fairly negative press about failing audits in local authorities. And Neil Harris joined us in September. He's kind of the specialist in the UK market, and this has been an extra part of our remit added from DULUC, Department of Housing, something local government. So we've taken that on. We don't want to keep on taking on remits just for the sake of it, but it makes sense if we are going to make a very strong audit system that supports better reporting and better outcomes for people who rely on that auditing. In our 3-year plan and strategy, we really wanted to explain what kind of regulator we are, because I think people look at regulators in different ways. Some of them look at them as police people. Some of them look as kind of the softly encouraging regulators, but we think that this really sums up the 4 faces of the type of regulator the FRC is and wants to be. If you want a better picture of this, it's in our annual report and accounts, and probably better resolution as well. So supervisor, well, the people in our supervision division would know exactly what that means. We come in, look at a sample, supervise, say yes, no, you conformed with the standard, you didn't. But we also want to look at things like culture and behaviours. And in the corporate reporting review team, they're looking more and more about the way reporting talks about those type of things. Maureen's team in corporate governance, when they do their reviews and their research, look at that more and more as like what's driving the behaviours that produce the assurance, the resilience, the reporting in general. Enforcing, well, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. If you look at our enforcement division, there have been some very high profile cases this year, Carillion being one of them, Silent Night. And, you know, they're the easy ones because they get the press attention, they're big fines. You know, everybody, tut-tuts, isn't that terrible, could never happen again. Carillion happened 4 years ago. And quite often we have pushback from people saying, oh, you're always talking about the negative, you're never talking about the positive. You know, that didn't happen 40 years ago. We're not clinging to something that was terrible and it's all better now. You know, it happened in the recent past. And that is, you know, obviously the firms involved have worked very hard at their own audit quality and their own behaviours. But there has to be enforcement. You can't be a regulator who just goes, well, better luck next time and please don't do that again. So you see that in the papers, but that's our enforcement part of this regulatory voice. The facilitator, these type of things, convening, engaging. We've upped our stakeholder engagement in the last 3 years, and I think our activities events like this with some of you individually, other trade bodies, institutes, the Investment Association. Those are great partners to be reaching as much of our ecosystem as we can. And what's great in the last 3 years is there's ever more appetite for us to participate alongside those type of people, which we think isn't just about ticking off how many events we do, but making sure that we are leading conversations where we should, participating where we have an opinion or a part of it, and sometimes educating ourselves as to how other people are thinking. And system partner, again, it's the education collaboration. And I think we want to be the system partner, for example, local audit. That isn't an area that people from the FRC in this room are experts on, but something makes sense for us to get involved in it. Our ecosystem, and I don't know if you can see all of the little bits on that. So, and all of you probably have a version of this in your own company reports or your own purpose statements. We believe, I'll start with rigorous audit, engaged investors, better reporting and quality, better governance, market confidence. So that's kind of the outlying kind of macro environment of why this actually makes is so important. For the FRC, we have a mandate to act in the public interest. And when you're doing that, that means you've got to get better outcomes for all stakeholders. It doesn't mean all stakeholders will love what we do all of the time, and I can tell you they don't. But that's not surprising if you are a regulator who's got a confident voice, who can lay out its stall and explain the benefits of what its activities are doing. So we're working with all the regulators you would think, and even some you've probably never even heard of internationally. But this is how our remit really touches so many other parts of the ecosystem in the UK. The ISSB, and again, don't worry, Sarah Jane, I'm not going to steal your thunder on this, but we participated in the response to their very broad consultation, and we were delighted to see a lot of people in their responses reference the FRC's response as a sensible way of looking at standards and the intersection with the regulatory framework. So that was an example of us having a voice that's central to the next stage of a very important standard setting activity. Some of the highlights of the year, we put together a new stakeholder insight group to really focus on their input into both the planned work, ongoing work, and get some feedback on stuff that we've done. We wanted to make it very engaged, so we're not going to them with finished product and then saying, well, I'm sure you'll love it. So we've had some very rich discussions, some challenging ones as well, but I think it's been a great initiative and we're all benefiting from it. In February, we did the Weights Principles review for private companies. Not really surprisingly, they mirror listed company activity. So there's a desire to do the right thing in private companies, not all private companies, but at the same levels and in the same way as listed companies. And I think, that really goes to where people are saying, oh, it's all burdensome, doesn't make any sense, it's all too difficult. People are adopting things that they don't actually even have to do because they know that their stakeholders like to see it and get confidence from it. So we've been very pleased to see that. In March, updated stewardship code signatory list. That's been one of the great outputs of the FRC in the last 3 years. It's a high bar. Some of you may be signatories to it in the room. It's a high bar, and it should be. We don't want this to just be some kind of, tick on the box, we're a member of the stewardship code. And remember, it's not one and done. You have to reapply every year, and that will keep the standards high. We've been overwhelmed this year by the second tranche of applications, and we just see that growing. And we are delighted when people say it's a huge badge of honour to have passed the test and be able to say to their clients and stakeholders that they are signatories of it. Local audit consultation began, and that's the beginning of where we become the systems partner. I won't go through absolutely everything. Our The AQR summaries, they're obviously pored over by the audit firms. It's a bit of a league table for them. They want to be able to say, look what we did. But they also want to use it as this is what we're doing to improve those scores going forward. We also updated a number of standards, including IFRS 102. And so it's constant. All of these standards have a place. They have to be reviewed, obviously. We also looked at a lot of guidance. We are being sparing with our guidance, but when we put it out, we want it to have the right effect. The professional judgment guidance was very well received because I think people were very much looking for that idea of what were we expecting for challenge to management, challenge to boards, challenge to auditors. We want that to be a constructive relationship and see more of it. And the JFAR climate deep dive, a lot of people forget that we also regulate actuaries, and that was the actuarial view of climate risk. Not the easiest read, but an important one for them when looking at risks through portfolios. Enforcement, I touched on this before, and I won't go through every single piece of this, but that's the level of the work underway in our enforcement division, which is mainly staffed by lawyers and forensic accountants. That's in March 2022, that's obviously in our annual report, but it's constant. And what we are pleased, it's nice to have headline numbers in the press to show that we're an enforcement regulator, etc. What we are most delighted about is where constructive engagement happens. When we open a case and we can lead to a settlement that results in better behaviours, change in the way some of the audit firms do things without it having to go to the tribunal every time. And we want to see more of that as well. Stakeholder engagement, they've got a few numbers. That's the type of thing I show my boss to show why I need such a large staff and all of the things we're involved in. But I think our more confident voice is being reflected in the level of activity, the level of engagement, the vast number of topics we're talking about, which reflects our remit. But also, we obviously are an important part of the UK corporate world, and we want to continue to support all of you and other people in the ecosystem have better outcomes for your stakeholders. So that is me, and I think I pushed, sorry, Miranda, I pushed you on. That's a bit of a gallop through what we've been doing, but I think if John was here, he would agree to say that, with me that the 3 years since I started talking at this, we've just really done so much more and so much different stuff with supporters like Black Sun. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic, Kate. Great overview of everything. I'm just going to keep the questions really short. Kate's going to be around for the morning, so if you've got any specific questions, find her, and we're going to just keep this bit a bit shorter. But just picking up on your last point, you've done so much in the last 3 years. There's been so much change. There's still so much uncertainty. For many companies here today, it's overwhelming. And everybody's feeling a bit bewildered. So what is the one key message you'd like to get to this audience, who are mostly preparers in the reporting process or involved in governance in some way? One message to them, very quick message, and a message that you'd like to get back to the boardrooms of these companies they represent.
Absolutely, it is overwhelming, and the feedback we get is, what one? Is it TCFD? Is it this one? Is it that one? Is it all of them? I think if you've set out your strategy and you're talking, and if Carol Page was here, she would say she thinks people try to do too much and they don't say, this is my strategy and these are the things that prove that I'm doing my strategy. And if I can't do it today, I'm going to explain why I'm going to do it in 3 months, or it's going to take me 3 years. It's okay, because I think what happens is, and dare I say, at board level, someone goes to a conference, well, they've got a friend who said, oh, we're doing 300 pages on that. I can't believe you're only doing 50. And there starts to be this kind of panic and this nervousness, and it's like, well, okay, well, we better do that because he heard that that's better. And we're saying to people, have faith in yourselves. If you're saying and doing what is transparent, that's fine. But doing this kind of FOMO thing is what is underlying, I think, a lot of this kind of panic. We say if you're making widgets in Northamptonshire, you probably don't have to report as though you were Shell. So kind of work out what your story is, to your point. The communication of it, be transparent. Section 172, it's comply or explain. The explanations are fine. I mean, we had to do it for 3 years. We didn't even really have a board, and but we were clear about why we didn't have a board and what was the problem, what we were going to do to solve it. So don't get sucked into the FOMO is our plea. And when we put out guidance, we do not say, okay, and this will mean 200 more pages in your annual report. We've never said that. We don't know where that comes from when people say, oh, the burden. All we said was we would suggest you do this. So I think, just holding your confidence a bit hard and saying to the board, this is enough.
Message for the board, because this is what we need. We need the board saying this is strategic.
Tell them to stop going to cocktail parties and conferences where people freak them out with what they should be doing. And I can't believe they should, if they've got the right people in-house, they've got the right advisors, stick to your knitting, do it. But you should be taking your stakeholders. If people saying, I didn't understand that bit you did on this, you need to be clearer, take it on board and change it. But, they don't have to report like Shell. Really, they don't.
Okay. So take a strategic approach. Get to that board.
And
all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sally.
And Kate will be around all day. All right, thanks. Miranda, next up from the FRC. Can I introduce Miranda? Well, actually, there you go.
Which button is it?
The clicker thingy is here.
Okay, so that way's forward.
We're on that.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Shares in cocktail party organisers just plummeted, I think. Right, okay, I'm going to make this very short and sweet. And as Sally says, I'm around for most of today, so feel free to ask questions during the roundtables or very easily found, unfortunately, on LinkedIn, so you can also direct message as well. I won't go through this because Kate did a very excellent explanation. I mainly put it there because the rest of my slides are quite boring. So I only have 4 of these in the order of governance, reporting, audit, and then our role as the regulator. And I'm going to sort of just mainly take a very quick canter through the position paper that we published in July, and what's happened since then and what's coming up and sort of kind of why we did it. So as Kate mentioned, the government response was pretty long, pretty extensive, and we don't have a timetable, a firm timetable for primary legislation to create ARGA. So in that environment, we wanted to create some certainty, some stability around what to expect in the period between now and when we become ARGA. And so we use the position paper as an opportunity to speak about the things that we can do now without that primary legislation. So starting with the governance space, audit committees, radically important part of this reform story. It won't work if audit committees aren't as effective as they possibly can be, aren't prioritising audit quality, and aren't looking to improve their overall corporate reporting. So with that in mind, one of the recommendations in one of the 3 reviews, or actually 2 of them, in relation to Kingman's views and the views of the Competition and Markets Authority, were that audit committees, that their role needed to be elevated a bit more, and there needed to be some oversight by the regulator of what audit committees are doing, particularly in relation to the focus on audit quality during the tendering process. So with that in mind, we will be creating audit committee minimum standards, or a standard with a capital S, and that will be mandatory once there is legislation, but bearing in mind that there is some strong appetite and engagement from within audit committee chairs at the moment for us to move forward with that sooner, so that they can understand what that looks like and sort of smooth the path towards mandatory reporting. We're going to, well, we have been over the past month or so, been engaging directly with audit committee chairs of FTSE 350 companies, which is the group that are affected by this, and talking them through our ideas for a consultation on that minimum standard. And we will consult publicly on that November, I think, is, don't quote me on that, but we're aiming for November. So that'll be a standard that we'll publish for use in 2023. It won't be mandatory, it'll be comply or explain at that point until we formally become ARGA, but it'll provide an opportunity for audit committees to kind of get used to what we're expecting and try and gradually improve their reporting before that standard becomes mandatory. But what I should point out, and this is a really important bit, is almost none of this will be anything new at all. So what it's really trying to do is bring together content from the Corporate Governance Code, from the guidance for audit committees, from the audit practice quality aid, I think it's called, and other sort of pieces of guidance that are peppered around in various different places in the sort of FRC publications at the moment, and put that all in one place so that if you are an audit committee member or an audit committee chair, there is a single sort of document you can refer to for guidance on what we expect in relation to reporting on audit tenders and audit quality. So that's what we're going to do there, and hopefully some of you may be here from FTSE 350s today and have audit committee chairs that are engaged in that process. So please keep an eye out for that. Corporate Governance Code, as Kate said, we're going to consult on that in Q1 of 2023, hopefully, fingers crossed, but I need to caveat that because one of the dependencies we have around the best time to consult on the code is a piece of secondary legislation that BEIS are intending to bring forward. And that will be, I'll come to that next because that's the corporate reporting legislation. But what we don't want to do is publish a code consultation that refers to new corporate reporting regulations that none of you have seen yet. So we kind of need that to be in the public domain so that you can, when you're responding to that consultation, you've got all the information you need to understand what the corporate reporting framework looks like in which this code will be applied. So fingers crossed for Q1 2023. It might slide a little bit, but as always, we will keep people informed through our publications and our press notices and stuff, and kind of let you know how that's going. It's not going to be a wholesale rewrite, as Kate said. We don't want to do that. The primary focus is on the changes that are being driven by the reform programmes. That's mainly Section 4, audit, risk and internal control. We will use the opportunity to tidy up things if during the course of our research and monitoring over the past few years we've noticed particularly that sections of the code aren't being interpreted the way that we thought they might be. If we think there are useful changes we can make there, then we'll consult on those. But it's not going to be 2018 all over again. It's, you know, the structure of the code will remain as it is now, so don't panic. The biggest changes will be in relation to the removal of the viability statement and replacing that with the resilience statement, and all those sorts of things. There we go, corporate reporting. Right, so I imagine this is the one that you're most interested in, so I'll spend a little bit longer on this. The most important thing I can say at the beginning of this, for anybody who is a little bit confused about what the plans are for public interest entities, existing PIs are going to stay PIs. So if you're already a PI, you are going to stay a PI for the time being. So listed, bank, insurer, etc. There will also be a new category of size-based PIs. So this is the large private companies, and that will be anybody who has more than 750 employees and a turnover of more than 750 million. So that's a size-based PI, but all PIs are not created equal, so you won't be the same as an existing PI in respect of what you're required to do from an audit perspective. So all that a size-based PI, a new PI that is, we just call them old PIs and new PIs for the purpose of this conversation. New PIs will only have to have a PI auditor and comply with the non-audit services cap. So they won't have to do mandatory rotation and tendering and the other things that current old PIs have to do. So just get that out there. As you're talking about these new requirements, just have a sense of, am I a PI, am I an old PI and I'm staying a PI, am I maybe going to be a new PI? Am I not there yet, but I might be in future if I've got growth aspirations to be PI size? So with that in mind, there will be 4 new reporting obligations for PIs. So this will apply to all of those PIs, the old ones and the new ones. If you are an old one and you are under the 750, then you will not have to do these. You can do them if you want, and we would actually, if you are listed, probably encourage you to do most of this anyway. But this is where it gets a little bit complex, because the government has decided, in order to reduce this kind of overall complexity and reporting burden on the smaller entities, that these regulations are only going to come in respect of entities that hit that size threshold. So bear that one in mind as well. This is all going to come in through secondary legislation as we currently understand it. So a statutory instrument, it won't be in the ARGA bill. And that means we expect it potentially to be available in draft form sooner than that bill. BEIS have sort of indicated that they're hoping for the beginning of next year, roughly, to publish that. Note I said publish, not lay. So the publish would be stick out in the public domain. It doesn't necessarily mean pass through Parliament. So again, timing of all of this is a little bit up in the air and unfortunately completely outside of the FRC's control. So all 4 of these will form part of that statutory instrument. Timing of implementation as yet not certain. And again, that'll be something I think that BEIS will be wanting to kind of informally consult on during the drafting process and sort of just understand from the market what people's sentiments are about when this should come in and for what reporting period should it start, bearing in mind other regulations that will be coming in over the same time period. So I wouldn't expect anything before 2024 at this stage. It could be later. It won't be any sooner than that. Some of you may also have seen recent press coverage of companies with fewer than 500 employees not having any regulations or nothing, which made from a fantastic byline, but isn't actually strictly correct. What's actually happened so far is that the government has changed a threshold test in the way that it assesses the burden associated with new regulation. So when they're coming up with a new piece of policy that is going to require regulation, there's a tick box to say, is this going to apply to companies over a certain size? Now that was automatically set at 50 until Monday, now it's 500. So anything new coming down the pipeline is going to have to go through that assessment process, and there's an automatic assumption that nothing new will apply to companies with fewer than 500 employees unless there is some valid justification for that. So it's not sweeping away safety regs or anything like that, but it does mean that there's that slightly higher hurdle and there needs to be a justification for any new business reporting obligation. If it's going to apply to companies smaller than 500 employees, then that needs to be a lot stronger of an argument. So it's not retrospective, it's not going to change anything as it is now, but what BEIS are doing is a lot of work on trying to understand streamlining of reporting thresholds more generally. So what's a micro entity, what's a small, what's a large, what's a pie, etc. And that all kind of fits into that broader landscape of deregulation. Exactly how that's going to affect these 4 reports and their timing and their scope, we still don't know yet, but the current assumptions are 750 and above for all of these, 2024 at the earliest, and being brought in via secondary legislation. So hopefully that gives you at least some sense of timing and things like that. I'm happy to discuss, in greater detail later individually if anybody wants to know about the content of those reporting disclosures to the extent that I can. But one thing I will point out as well is that the last piece about setting guidance on capital maintenance, we're not, that'll come later. So the first bit will be the actual disclosures on distributable reserves, not the taking on of the technical guidance. That's one piece that does need legislation. I'll go very, very quickly over this because I think it's of slightly less interest, but one thing I would say, that I did this slide recently to another group that was mostly made up of sort of governance professionals and people like that. And the sort of feedback was always of less importance. And I would say contraire to that, because if you are supporting an audit committee, then a good understanding of what's going on in the audit market and what is driving the motivation of the audit firms that you're that are tendering for your audit or providing your audit report is actually quite useful information to have, particularly if you need to steer your audit committee chair. So in that sense, having an understanding of the audit market measures that the FRC or ARGA as regulator is going to be using to improve audit quality is useful information to have. And with that in mind, you're probably already aware of operational separation because that's had a lot of press. So this is the separation of the audit part of a practice from the consulting part of a practice, not in physical terms, but in terms of reporting and the way we understand how they are prioritising their audit work. So this is to encourage a focus on audit culture and quality, and that's something that we've already been doing on a voluntary basis for a few years now, and we expect to have concluded and for reporting to be live and happening from the Big Four by 2024. So although that is going to need primary legislation to become mandatory, we're already well on the way to that and having really good conversations with those Big Four firms. The one that people are most concerned about, I think, particularly from a reporting perspective, is managed shared audit, because this is the one where during a tender of a FTSE 350 company, there's an expectation that you will carve out a meaningful proportion, TBC what that means in law, of your audit and offer that only to a challenger firm, i.e. one that sits outside of the Big Four. If you are going to tender only for challenger firms, then you don't have to worry about this. If you're going to give the whole audit to a smaller firm, then that's fine. But this is creating a lot of uncertainty, particularly for those who've got a tender coming up in the next few years, as to how exactly we're going to set the criteria for that meaningful proportion, what exemptions will be available, if any, and the timing of that, whether their next tender is going to be in it. I suspect there'll be some tender arbitrage. If you've got one coming up in the next sort of 2 years, you might want to bring it forward to try and get out of doing this. I'm not saying that. But so I know that there are lots of questions about that. Unfortunately, most of them we can't answer right now, simply because this is one of those things that has to have primary legislation, and until it does, we have very little power to start articulating publicly what it will look like, because we'd be presupposing what the legislation says. So, but we will say what we can when we can, and we're very happy to engage with people, audit committees in particular, who want to understand a little bit more about how it may work, but we can't definitively say exactly what it's going to look like right now, nor when the first tenders that come up are going to be in that regime. We also have one of the areas where we have powers already, and we will continue to have those powers over the whole of the audit market, is in the standard setting space. So this is important because it's what drives how auditors conduct the audit and how they report on the audit. And it's an area where audit committees can test and challenge them on their compliance with the standards and their attention to quality issues. So there's a lot happening there. This is one of the focuses of the position paper, because this is somewhere where we do have the levers already. We don't need any more legislation. We can continue to act. So we do have a list in the position paper of the standards that we'll be reviewing over the next 12 to 18 months. And our focus there is on the usability and informativeness of auditor reporting in particular, and also updating the International Code of Ethics, which interestingly has its own definition of what a public interest entity is, which unfortunately is not going to be the same as the one we have in domestic legislation, so we'll see how that works out. Finally, there's the profession. So we're doing a lot of work with both firms and the professional bodies as to how they train their auditors, how they examine their auditors, trainee auditors, and then the continuing professional development that happens in order to create an environment, what we define as a good audit culture, which particularly involves a focus on identifying fraud and on professional scepticism, which are two of the things that consistently come up with low scoring in our audit quality reviews. Finally, last slide, us as a regulator. So this is my plea for everybody to sort of recognise, as Kate said, that we have to have primary legislation in order to be able to do quite a lot of this work, and well, to finish it off and to embed it and to to really make it come alive and become that credible, fit for purpose regulator that Kate was talking about. So we're fairly far along that track, but this is the final bit of the puzzle that will give us that regulatory landscape. A big part of that is having a solid statutory funding basis, a fair one where people pay for what they receive the benefit of, and that puts an onus on us as well to create transparency reporting so that you as preparers, for example, who are paying some of funding some of what the FRC or ARGA does, understand what you're getting for it and where the value for money is. And then there's a list there on the right-hand side of the new powers and functions we'll get, which also requires some primary legislation, so that I won't go through those. As a final note, some of you are probably thinking, well, where's directors enforcement in all of this? Because that's the one that I always get asked about. The reason it wasn't in the position paper was because it's one of those areas that, being completely new and entirely dependent on primary legislation, there wasn't really much we could say that will happen in the next 12 to 18 months on that, because we don't know what it's going to look like. So again, not anything to worry about right now, not anything to worry about at all really, from our perspective, because the government's intention is very much not to create anything new or burdensome particularly, so there's no new liability. It's simply the creation of the layering of a civil enforcement regime underneath the existing criminal one, to make sure that there is actually a mechanism by which a regulator could enforce breaches of statutory duties in the Companies Act that already exist and have existed for many, many, many years and are being complied with by 99.9% of the direct population, but are very, very rarely called upon, because in actual fact there is no real mechanism to do that until it's gone nuclear, you're insolvent, or your shareholders have decided to take some form of action. It's that in-between space where something egregious has happened. Everybody assumes that a regulator would be able to take some action, and that regulator doesn't currently exist, but it will hopefully be us in the form of ARGA, and able to do things about breaches of corporate reporting and audit directors' obligations only. So not impinging on what the FCA does, not impinging on what the PRA does, not impinging on what the SFO or the Insolvency Service or any of those other regulators in that space, but just closing a gap, essentially, that we have at the moment. With that in mind, I will shut up now and hand back to Sally.
So make it a good one.
Thank you so much for that. Brilliant, really nice and clear. I hope that I'm going to be able to reflect some interest in the room as I ask a question, which is particularly around your corporate reporting slide.
Yes.
It would be really helpful, I think, for our December year ends and March year end clients and publicly listed companies to be thinking about, I think there's a desire to show that you are aware of what's coming, and you're keen to prepare yourselves, from a practical point of view, but also signal from a corporate reporting point of view that best practice is front of mind and you're eager to do your best.
Yes.
And we notice it particularly in conversations, for instance, about the resilience statement. Are there steps that companies can be taking now to get themselves in the best possible shape with a view to the next annual report that's coming out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, well, the first thing is, as I said, is to work out, where are you going to be in terms of the scope of this? Because if you are a smaller listed company, then you're going to have a choice. If you're a smaller premium listed company, and I say this with a heavy caveat because if the FCA goes ahead with plans for a single segment, this might change, but then in order to be, this is something we have to consult on. We need to understand whether the market's desire and expectation is for consistency and comparability. So if you're a smaller listed company, but your peers are mostly larger than you, and they're all having to do a resilience statement, then your largest investors are probably going to want you to do a resilience statement as well, because they don't want to have to spend extra time looking across their portfolio going, okay, well, this one does this, and this one does this, and this one does this. So I need to engage more with this one because they're not saying they don't have this content, it'll be of lower quality, blah, blah, blah. Nobody wants that. So, and actually from an ease of future reporting point of view, if you're already doing a viability statement, and now your obligation to do that is gone, or will be gone, that may be an opportunity for you to go, oh yeah, great, we don't have to do it anymore. But actually, to Kate's point, what do your stakeholders expect and want from you? And actually thinking about doing a resilience statement, even if you don't have to do it, something that's going to be a useful piece of reporting for you, both internally and externally, useful discipline, feeding into, for example, a better understanding of your strategy. And, because ultimately it's a piece of reporting to help the users of your accounts understand how resilient your strategy and your business model is. Now, if that's not a sensible thing to report on, I don't really know what is. So, in that sense, we will try our hardest to make sure that the guidance that sits around this and the underlying requirements in the first place are not overly burdensome and complex. And to Kate's other point earlier, there is no need for you to do a tick box kind of, oh, well, everybody's saying this and everybody's saying that, and my lawyer says I can't do this and I can't do that. But just to take a step back and report on what it is you're doing, how you've stress tested, et cetera, et cetera. So I think to lead up to that, if you acknowledge an exercise that you've undertaken to sort of, almost like a gap analysis, where am I? Do I want to do this reporting in future? Do I see the value in it? How might I do it? And to what sort of standard am I thinking about that? That's probably useful signalling for stakeholders as to how seriously you're taking this. And if you have the kind of stakeholders who aren't bothered about that kind of thing, then, well, hey, you're very lucky.
That's great. No, thank you so much for that. That's
worries.
brilliant.
Okay, super. Thank you, Miranda.
All right, I'm hoping that I'm mic'd up. Yes, I am. Hello. I have less than 15 minutes, it seems, to try and do a whistle-stop tour through ESG and sustainability. And someone who's worked in the space for a good few years now, that's not an easy task, but I'll do my best. Just to put it into context of sustainability at the FRC, so looking at what we do. We actually set up an ESG and climate group, and it's a steering group within the FRC that acts as an advisory body for the executive committee and where appropriate the FRC board. So we don't have a division that looks at ESG solely, the reason being that we want to coordinate and collaborate across all the different areas, professions that we regulate. So we have a matrix structure, let's say, and we have all of the different divisions: enforcement, supervision, regulatory standards, which is the division that I work within. And we're really looking at high quality governance, stewardship, reporting, auditing, assurance, how we can help you improve the quality of your reporting. If you're a preparer, how can we support audit firms in providing assurance? We're also starting to look at the market in terms of who's providing assurance, etc. So a lot is undertaken, and I almost forgot the actuaries, as I often do. And they would be very upset about that. But we mentioned them earlier, Kate mentioned them as well, in terms of them really trying to understand climate risk across investment portfolios, for insurance companies. It's really quite important that they get a good understanding of how to model climate risk and opportunities. So that's just a quick introduction to how we are looking at sustainability and ESG. And then Kate introduced you to an ecosystem. I'm going to introduce you to another ecosystem. I feel it fits well with the theme of sustainability. This is a snake or an S or whatever, backwards S. This is to try and encapsulate, and it's deliberately busy. You're not expected to read everything on here. I'm not going to go through everything on here. To try and depict all the way from collecting data, determining which frameworks you want to report, all the way to how that information is then put out there, distributed. Obviously, it's assured in some cases. How is it consumed? So how are data analysts consuming that information, investment institutions? Then our role as a supervisor. So what are we doing to help improve the quality? How are we looking at that? And then ultimately regulation. And I hate to use the phrase, but it is appropriate sometimes, it's a journey. And some of these bits are more mature than others, but it's deliberately there to explain that sustainability reporting, whilst that seems to be the focus, and I'll come on to the acronym alphabet soup in a minute, there is a lot more that is required to make sure that there is effective, high quality reporting that is useful to investors, that they can make decisions based upon. And all of that needs to be in place. So we see it as a lot more than putting some corporate reporting standards out there, because technically they could be perfect, but without all these other elements, it's not going to produce the required effect. I've also highlighted in the top right corner some existing UK reporting requirements. So some people think ESG, sustainability, that's new. It's not. Corporate governance, it's now expected that you're talking about the governance of sustainability-related risks, opportunities, matters. How's accountability, responsibility for all of that goes right to the top. Modern slavery statements, gender pay gap reporting. There's a whole host of information, streamlined energy and carbon reporting. All of that is part of ESG. So anything new will look to encapsulate what already exists. And so we have already in the UK been reporting on ESG for quite a while. Kate mentioned earlier that we did a response to the ISSB proposals. And this is my little slide to help with the alphabet soup. So some of you may have heard of one or more or all of these acronyms before. The good news is you don't need to worry about the ones outside of the box any longer, because they were all swallowed up by the IFRS Foundation and the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. Now, what's the remit of the International Sustainability Standards Board? They put out 2 draft standards that they're proposing. During the summer, they closed the public consultation. They're now working to finalise those 2 standards. Those 2 standards are on general purpose, general disclosure requirements, which would cover any ESG-related risk and opportunity, and one on climate. The good news for those in the room that have started TCFD reporting or are starting TCFD reporting in the near future, it is very closely aligned to the proposals from the ISSB in their climate standard. There are some differences, so it's not 100% aligned, but if you were already starting or started your TCFD reporting, you'll find there isn't as big a step change needed. So what have we got left? We've got the ISSB, and they are looking at the impact of sustainability on enterprise value for the purposes of primary users, so investors, providers of capital, shareholders. So that is their remit. They have tweaked their constitution at the IFRS to do this, but like the ISB who issue the IFRS standards, it is about capital providers and the impact on the company. TCFD has been the foundation for everything so far that the ISSB has developed. So they have followed the lines of governance, strategy, risk management, metrics and targets, which is something for those who are doing their TCFD reporting, you're already familiar with. So you're not having to then think about a different structure. And future developments will follow those 4 key elements, which I think makes sense in terms of how you would consider these matters in the context of your company, business model, what have you. And then we have GRI, and I should confess that I did work at GRI before I joined the FRC. They have a slightly different perspective. They are looking at how the company impacts the external environment or society. So they exist in their own right independently going forward. They are working with the ISSB. They're in collaboration to see how they can work together. And TCFD has obviously influenced the ISSB. Now, I haven't put in this slide, and I will do a very quick mention because I'm sure somebody will bring it up if I don't. There are other developments happening internationally as well. So for those that are in the know, the US put out an SEC proposal on climate disclosure. They're very much focused on investor protection. So if you are saying that we are going to be net zero by 2050, and your investors are taking that on face value, you need to disclose how. So we need you to come forward and explain how. Don't put these lofty ambitions out there if you've nothing to back it up. So that's very much how they're looking at it. And then we have the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, such an acronym-heavy world, which is part of the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU, which will impact all the members of the EU, but also, and here's the headline, overseas branches, subsidiaries of EU or operate in the EU or EU companies of a certain size. I'm not going to go into any of that detail. So the reason for mentioning those other ones is there is rationalization. Great, we've come a long way in terms of really getting behind and focusing on international solutions, but there is the potential for a US solution on climate, and there is obviously the European initiative that's going on. So equivalence is something to be considered, and all those bodies are thinking about that for those companies that might be caught by more than one of these reporting initiatives. Okay, I'm going to spend the rest of my time, having done a whistle-stop tour through the FRC's activities, what's happening on the international level, to talk about a recent report that we put out that I'm sure some of you have already read or at least glanced through. And this was a thematic review on TCFD reporting and climate reporting in the financial statements. It's very long, but it's very long for a reason, because it gives a lot of useful examples from actual companies who reported for the first time December 2021. The sample was skewed such that it was looking at those companies that are highly exposed to climate, mining, oil and gas, transport, those kind of sectors, with the expectation that they would have been doing this reporting for longer, or at least thinking about it for longer. And those are the ones where there will be more emphasis on seeing their TCFD disclosures. The good news is, when it comes to the connectivity with the financial statements, we did a review a few years back on climate as well, looked at 24 companies. Only 6 companies made any reference to climate in their financial statements. This time, 22 out of 25 did. So that is a massive shift in the space of a couple of years of really thinking about, if I'm going to talk about decarbonisation, if I'm going to talk about my net zero target, there's an expectation that somehow it has a financial impact now or in the future in terms of impairment reviews, looking at useful lives of existing assets, etc. So we looked at the TCFD reporting, and we looked at the impact of that and how well did it align. So some areas for improvement. I can see you all being very quiet now. Granularity and specificity. And this is often the case with new reporting requirements. They start out at a very generic boilerplate level. What's really expected is, though, that they're more specific to your geography, to your business segments, to your sectors, to your business model, to your operations. And that will not be the same because you're all unique. So it's really thinking about specifically rather than we considered climate change. That is not very helpful to an investor. If you did consider it, how did you consider it? What did you consider? And there isn't an expectation that you have all the answers in year one either, because it takes time to gather this data. So if you have looked at a couple of business segments or a couple of geographical regions, talk about those and explain that in time you will look in more depth at others. Because the regime at the moment is comply and explain. And so explanations, we talked about this earlier, are valid, but they do need to be there. Balance was the second one. So this was the balance between opportunities and risks, and this is really getting to the heart of avoiding greenwashing. So if you have a couple of opportunities, don't overemphasize them if they're really not that material or significant. So they're 2% of your business. Don't make them seem as though they're 50%. And that disclosures are a true representation of the risks and opportunities that you've identified. Interlinking. So I'll talk about connectivity with the financial statements a little bit more, but this is interlinkage with other narrative disclosures. You've got your strategic report, section 172, your corporate governance statement. Do they all align? Do they all give a coherent picture and story of where you are with regards to transition, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and that you can see the same assumptions underpin all the other areas? And that climate risk aligns with your other risk assessment disclosures, risk management disclosures. Materiality, this will not surprise you that this is on there. It's not always obvious in reviewing these reports which disclosures are material or might have a material financial effect and which don't. So do help the reader understand which are material. But also there's a question mark over, do you need to be putting in there information that isn't material? Because it does obscure and de-emphasize what is material. So sometimes less is more, not I need to write 100 pages on all of the geographical regions. Really do focus on what is material to the business. And then connectivity, I will use this slide to explain some of this. So some of the linkages that we look to see in the front half and the back half. So when you disclose information about risks and uncertainties with regards to climate, how does that impact on your judgment and estimates? And if it doesn't have an impact, write that, because otherwise a reader is left expecting to see it somewhere in an impairment review, value and use calculation, whatever it may be, and it just isn't there. So if it isn't material, explain that it isn't, because we're in that transition phase where you might not have disclosed something because you consider it not material, or you don't have the data yet. So be specific about that. Assumptions underlying TCFD scenarios. I could say the same here about transition plans. So your plans to decarbonise, reach your net zero targets, again, are using those assumptions and sensitivities in the financial statements. So where you see the world in 5 years, 10 years, does that match up with what you're looking at when it comes to your cash flow forecasts? Emissions reduction commitments and strategies. Again, this is the same thing. If you expect to be dependent upon new technology that's not yet proven, what's the uncertainty around that? Are you investing R&D in it? Are you expecting someone else to do so? If you're electrifying machinery, your fleet, is that having an impact on the useful lives of your existing assets? You know, where's CapEx coming in? All of these things, it really does need to fit together. And then finally, think about the impact on segmental and revenue disclosures. So sometimes these will emanate in different ways depending on how you've defined your business segments. Sometimes a business segment cannot be affected. It can be significantly affected. An investor would find it very useful to understand that. And this is my last slide, and I think we're sharing the slides, right? So this was not so much a presentation, apart from I will emphasize a couple of areas. We are putting out a lot of publications and engaging quite heavily on all aspects of ESG. And one that we, as well as the TCFD disclosures that I've talked about, that thematic, the FRC lab put out an improving ESG data report. So it wasn't just about climate, but some of the challenges around gathering this data. What systems and controls do you need to put in place to have high quality data? And it's a lot more complex than financial reporting in the sense that you need to go up and down your value chain. And some of you who are looking at Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions will already know that that is a challenging area to get reliable, accurate information. Next week, it's not on there yet because I can't provide a link to it, there will be a report on net zero as well. So our FRC lab have taken the time to speak to lots of stakeholders, investors, preparers, about net zero reporting. So what information is useful for investors when they see that you have a net zero target? What are they expecting to see in terms of interim targets, milestones, that you have a sort of business strategy that will allow you to get there? So focusing on the how as well. So watch out for that. That's coming next week. And I'm done.
Super. Not done yet. Okay. And I'm going to invite Anne up to the table, and I'm going to allow Anne 2 questions. And what I'm
Also going to say is if there are specific questions, please email us and we will collect all the questions and get them to the FRC and provide something with all the answers that we can, okay? So if we don't get to them.
Thank you very much, Nadrine. Very informative, and I particularly liked your sort of ecosystem at the beginning, because I think it's really important to always think about we're part of an ecosystem, that there are several drivers throughout that system and how they all link up together. Now, 2 questions. I have a long list of questions. So I guess a lot of our clients have been reporting against the TCFD in one way or the other over a number of years. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the questions that keep coming up still is what goes where? As disclosures improve, as disclosures are enhanced, etc., there is so much of it that it's very difficult to have it all in the annual report. Because then proportionality, all of a sudden you end up with a TCFD report with a bit of an equity story sort of wrapped around it, right? So what could you put in the annual report and what can you put in your climate report, right? Because we're seeing a lot of climate reports being produced at the moment.
Yeah. So the recent review we did look at climate-specific reports, sustainability reports, other documents, provided they were well referenced and signposted from your annual report and accounts. So our remit at the FRC is looking at the annual report and accounts. And obviously there can be other documents that the information refers to. So that is okay, but be specific. And also don't say that we have provided this disclosure across our annual report and accounts. That's not helpful to anyone left to try and hunt for that information. So if it is in a separate report, be very specific. The other thing that was noticed is the titles weren't consistent. So it was referring to a report and the title had changed. And so you're left trying to find something on the website that doesn't even exist. So being specific is really key. Now, I would use a principle, and the principle is that this is the annual report and accounts for your primary users. So are there subsets of information that you should be putting into your annual report, even if there is further detail in supplementary reports, because it is that significant and material that an investor should be seeing that in the context of the annual report and accounts. It also helps with connectivity between the front half and the back half. But there is no one size fits all here, and there are different ways of doing it, and as long as it is clearly referenced and signposted. The other thing that I would add is just more words isn't what we're looking for, and Kate talked about this earlier. So really making it easy and accessible for a reader to see what is material, what are my significant risks and opportunities when it comes to climate. And there are some good examples in the report of, taking the different elements of the TCFD and providing links to where that information is across the report. And we'd really emphasize that. We will move to a world, I hope, and some of you will know that there is digital reporting taxonomies, and we have developed one for TCFD reporting, and we really encourage you to use that because that is a good way of getting investors to locate the information really quickly. The key thing about that is it has to be well tagged, because otherwise you'll just be sending them to spurious, information that doesn't make sense. So it has to be used well.
I think that's really good advice. I think that was a problem for a number of companies last year, sort of scratching their heads a little bit. And I think it wasn't helped by the fact that auditors seem to have different interpretations of the regulation as well, and difference between them and difference within them as well, sometimes.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is the statement of compliance or explanation does need to be in the annual report. Yeah. That cannot be something outside of the annual report.
No. So my other question is around transition plans. So obviously we're looking at probably 2023. What would you recommend companies do now, this year, for this next set of reports that are coming out, in order to prepare themselves? What are some of the markers, what are some of the things that they can start sort of both in terms of sort of internally thinking about, but also what should they start reporting on now?
Yeah. There's some really good guidance, if you haven't yet read it, from the TCFD, the Financial Sustainability Board itself, Stability Board, that talks about performance targets and metrics and transition plans. And they have some key principles. And it's very much, what is a transition plan? Not to be mixed up with an adaptation plan. This is your transition to a low carbon economy, not how you may or may not be impacted by a changing climate. That's an adaptation plan. There does seem to be some confusion around the two. And for those that know, there is a transition plan task force that was set up jointly with the FCA and the Treasury. And they have produced some draft guidance already. They're coming out with a framework. And it's really led to be sort of like the gold standard for transition plan and transition plan disclosure. So some of the key principles are, it needs to be top down and bottom up. So it needs to align to your strategy, but it also needs to be actionable. So we need to be able to see what actions you are taking and when, of how you are going to transition to net zero at 2050. Needs to have performance metrics. So you need to set out your targets and how you're going to measure whether you're on target or not. And that's really quite important. Essentially, it needs to be credible. So again, if you're thinking about, there'll be some technology that comes along. I mean, we're only talking about, 2-3 decades away here. What's the sort of certainty at this point? Are you going to develop this? Are you partnering with others to try and develop this? So how dependent is it on things that don't yet exist? So those kind of uncertainties are really useful to understand. That's not to say it shouldn't be part of your transition plan, but it really is looking at how you're going to get from here to here, but also how can I tell whether you are on the right path or not? Those are some helpful hints, I would say.
Super helpful. Thank you.
So while everybody's doing that, just a final, very quick close. I just wanted to say, I guess what I'm hearing today is a lot of moving from the what, the how, to the why. And I'm looking at Carly here because we really have to start with the why. Why are we doing this? Yeah, and I think that would solve a lot of challenges because what's happening is we're focused bottom up on a lot of these things, and we really need that top-down approach. So I think if we can think about that and getting those that need to endorse that, whether it's the board, senior management, a champion internally, I think that will help you kind of cut through all the confusion. And the other thing I wanted to say, which is the title of our research this year, is if you're standing still, you're going backwards. We got to keep moving. And I encourage you to do that. And just like there's an appetite here to chat, to share knowledge, to collaborate. So please take advantage and do that. I mentioned a couple of good initiatives around education and things to one of the groups out there, and I'll again put it in the follow-up note for anybody who's interested in more detail. So I just wanted to give a big thank you to the AV guys at the back from Schroders. The Schroders team more generally have been amazing, supplying extra seats, dealing with all these extra bodies, which has been absolutely amazing, and of course sharing this space. A massive thank you to the team at Black Sun. I know I put a lot of you on the spot to moderate tables, to scribe, to do all those things, so thanks for rising to the challenge. And of course, a huge thanks to the board at Black Sun who've supported and indulged me on my engagement activities. So that's been really super. So again, thanks so much. I hope that a lot of you can stay, have a drink, have a sandwich with us, and continue the chat. And look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. And of course, final close. Bye, David.
Can you hear it? I've now got my own opportunity to get my own back now. I'm going to thank just quickly the FRC. Clearly, you guys are rock stars. This is a sellout gig. I also have an announcement to make. This is Sally's last gig. I heard an R then. That was good. Because actually, Sally, after 20 years of being a founder, colleague, director, inspirer, influencer, nudger, is leaving Black Sun to spend more time, in amongst other things, with her family. And for those of you who've tuned in to Sally's events over the last 2 to 3 years, you'll know that Sally's got 4 wonderful kids and a lovely dog called Luna. And let me tell you, Luna has participated pretty much in every single event that she's had online through COVID and will be sorely missed. Now, I first met Sally in the 90s. And I know there's no competition who which of us have preserved better, that's for sure. And in 2003, when Paul and I bought Black Sun, we invited Sally to come back and work with us to pioneer what was then an entirely new concept, which was this concept called corporate reporting, which frankly did not exist at the time. And we asked Sally to do something which now is fairly normal, is to set up an insight and research-driven insight team so we could provide advice and best practice advice around the latest regulations as we move towards what was then called something called the OFR, and advise clients what good looked like, grounded in the research that she started to produce, which we then integrated with our editorial, creative, and publishing services. And Sally being Sally took up this challenge. And she worked tirelessly to help us build what was and is an amazing business within corporate reporting. And just to give you a kind of sense of perspective, as I was coming in the tube today, I was just reflecting the scope of Sally's activities over the last 20 years. I'm sure she's going to correct me on this, but I reckon she's published with her brilliant team over 100 pieces of thought leadership and research, including 17 editions of the Complete 100. I think we must have held something like 150 odd events. And back of the envelope calculation, I reckon close to 20,000 people have indeed signed up and participated in those events. Sally personally has spoken on pretty much every continent as far as I'm aware, particularly from the North America, Europe and Southeast Asia. And actually I have a very personal experience of her reputation when I was invited to support our CEO in Singapore to speak at the Malaysian Institute of Accountants annual conference to 3,500 accountants. And as I arrived, I was met by a charming director of communications who greeted me with a look of horror on his face when he said, "You're not Sally." And when I'd got over the shock and actually congratulated him on his powers of observation, it made me realize, what a huge contribution Sally has made not only to our business and building it, but to the industry, which has also played out from being involved with things like the FRC Lab, the Eye Society. She's involved with things such as A4S, and the list indeed goes on. But I'm delighted to say Sally has left us a brilliant team in place to continue her great work and build on her legacy. So under the leadership of the likes of Harriet, who you saw a little earlier today, Anne and James, who will be leading the charge on provision of insight and advice around regulated reporting, sustainability strategy and reporting, and ESG consultancy. I think the team, I always lose count, is around 15 people, and rightly so. So before I have a few final remarks about the future, I just would invite everybody to put their hands together and really thank Sally for her contribution today and everything else. And I think, Amita, we might have a little something for her. I don't know where she is. There we go. There. Well done. There we go. Bye, Sia. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
So just before we, disband to go to lunch, what next? Now, we had a lot of fantastic insights today by the guys at the FRC and the discussions I was hearing. But just as an observation, since we've been doing this, I think I can generally say I've never seen such challenge, as the tectonic plates of the world are shifting. And I don't know a single organization that's operating or business model that's not changing. And we at Black Sun, we figure that within all this disruption and uncertainty, one of the greatest challenges out there is creating a better alignment between leadership teams, business strategy, and the organizations with the needs and wants of their critical stakeholder groups. And, at the heart of which is so much of what we've been talking about today. And I can say that Black Sun's focus and evolution, which we have continually done over the last 30 years, is really to work with our brilliant clients, many of whom are here today, to help them with this challenge. And that will be through developing our own skills and capabilities. But also, as some of you may be aware, we made our first acquisition this year of a company called PeopleMade. And if you don't know who they are specialists, a firm of consultants who are helping organizations define corporate purpose, aligning their culture and values with business strategy, employee engagement and activation, and work with significant clients both in the US, such as Meta and Peloton, and a number of major blue chips in the UK. I suspect it will not be our last acquisition as we build out our offer to take this challenge on. But we've always viewed, the value of what we've been talking today around this early concept that we were so keen on called corporate reporting, as a forcing device to provoke great conversations with the C-suite and within businesses, and really aligning the business through the frameworks that we've been discussing to deliver what we see today as really value, not just for investors, but wider stakeholder groups. So in closing, I'd like to thank everybody again for coming. I mean, clearly there's an appetite for these events. Indeed, on the 17th, we have an event which Richard is co-chairing with PeopleMade, which we'll be announcing soon. So please do feel free to sign up for that. But, lucky last, thank you guys for all making today such a success. So thank you. And I think there's lunch and wine next door. Thank you all. Thank you.